What is up, Thrive fam? CJ Finley here again with another episode of the Thrive on Life podcast. And I'm super excited for today's conversation. We're going to get right into it because I want to get as much awesome information out of my man, Paul, right here as possible, because I know he has a lot of value to bring you here today. But before we get into it, I'm just going to let you kind of give a rundown of where can people find out more about you, because I do want to get right into this conversation.
Yeah, the best way is a newsletter I've been writing weekly for about 4 years. Boundless.substack.com is where I am now. I don't know if I'll be there indefinitely, but also just Google my name. I'm the only one with that name on the internet, really. So pretty easy to find. Twitter, my newsletter, you'll find me, and I engage with a lot of people online.
Talk about an SEO hack, just having your name be the only name on there, right? First thing we're going to get into today is Paul wrote an amazing book called The Pathless Path, and I recently read it, and it really hit home with a lot of the things that happened in my past. And I think a lot of listeners that follow me and my journey and the Thrive journey are going to gain a lot of value from the Pathless Path. So I wanted to make a lot of the conversation kind of revolve around that. And one of the things that hit home with me in the book was when you talk about a quote where it says, "Dying is only one thing to be sad about. Living unhappily is something else. The culture we have built does not make people feel good about themselves. We are teaching the wrong things, and you have to be strong enough to say if the culture doesn't work, don't buy it. Create your own." So I wanted to start off with, what is your interpretation of when they say create your own culture, and why you put that in your book?
That quote was from a book, Tuesdays with Maury, and I've read it 3 or 4 times. Every time I read it, it makes me cry a little, because it's this guy at the end of his life, Maury Schwartz. It's this very famous book. It's read by millions of people. I highly recommend it to most people. This guy at the end of his life, Maury Schwartz, who finds out he's going to die, and he reconnects with one of his former students, Mitch Albom, who's now a famous writer now. And Mitch's own transformation aligns with his reconnection with his teacher, who he lost touch with for 10, 15 years when he was chasing his dreams, became a workaholic becoming a sports journalist and things like that. And it's this amazing book because it's this teacher that built his life around values that he cares about and never quite fit in, built his own culture. He pulled it off. And you see the book through Mitch's eyes of seeing his teacher, realizing these things in his own life. And the coolest thing about the book is if you go Google Mitch Albom now, he's now transformed his life and sort of followed in Maury's path. So I love reading these books about the end of life, about here's what matters, listen to me. Most people love these books, but then they don't do anything about it. I'm the crazy one that sits there and says, oh, that seems worth aiming at. Now let's go find out what that looks like.
What inhibits people from actually doing that? So why is there so few of the gentlemen that you just described in this world? And one of the things that hit home when I read that was he talked about, I think it was, what was the second gentleman's name that was describing the guy that died?
Mitch Albom.
He was describing how this man would like dance and find activities to do rather than sit there and watch TV. And it really reminded me of how easy it is to, one, forget how meaningful little things like that are. So a good instance is, shout out Scott Simmons. He's the one that helped me put this studio together. We were on a FaceTime right before this because we're going to record a video tomorrow. And he showed me, he was like, dude, I got a Sonos because every time I walk into your house, you have music playing and it just like makes me feel good. And I didn't even notice that because that's just something that I do. And I feel like people don't even realize that those little activities and those little things are an option. And I'd love your perspective on why they don't realize that.
One thing I've realized from writing my book, writing about work, writing about my own life transition, is that there are far more types of personalities than I could have imagined, right? And before I wrote my book, I talked to approximately 400 to 500 people about their relationship to work. And you realize there's this vast span of people. There are the people that are born and just never seem to pay attention to conventional scripts and norms and things like that and just go do crazy stuff. I was not one of those people. I paid attention to the norms around me and I fit my life into those norms. So I think what's resonated among people with my book is that I was deep in that path. And it wasn't that I didn't have the courage. I literally didn't even have the idea that I could work on my own.
When you say deep, give practical. Like how many years? What were you working on? What was your salary? So that people can understand.
Yeah. So you and I both industrial engineers, and in college I worked in industrial engineering jobs. I worked at GE and Pratt & Whitney in engine manufacturing, and thought I would go and run a factory one day. But every job I worked in, I got antsy and I wanted to move to the next one. So after school, I decided I would go into finance. And then I decided I wanted to try and break into consulting. And I was really uneasy about every job until I got into consulting. And I ended up breaking into one of the top firms in the world, McKinsey and Company, in the strategy consulting space as my second job, a year after working at GE in finance. And I wanted that so bad. Every bone in my body needed to be that person that worked at these special companies, these places that seemed too good to be true for someone like me that went to a school like UConn, and people told me, oh, you went to the wrong schools. You can't get a job here. So I ended up working at those firms, and I lasted in that industry for 9 more years. The interesting thing is I actually loved the work. I loved those 2 years working at McKinsey on strategy consulting. I was surrounded by smart, curious people. I was surrounded by managers that cared about me, and it was a culture and environment that invested in people. The thing that was weird immediately upon getting there, though, was that everyone was obsessed with the next step. Nobody seemed to live in the present. I was the weirdo that was like, this is great. Why aren't we just happy we're here? So I always had this restlessness, but I got caught up in chasing those next goals. When people are like, are you going to apply to business school? I'm like, should I be doing that? And everyone around me is applying to these amazing schools and getting in. So my manager had gone to MIT, and she goes, I think you'd have a good shot of getting into MIT. So I'm like, all right, I'll go there. And that's kind of when I got lost.
Yeah, you're following somebody else's dreams. It seems like.
Well, it was sort of my dream. This is the thing. I didn't have any imagination of working on my own or as an entrepreneur. I had no examples in my life. Everyone around me, all my friends, all my family, full-time workers who had built their life around continuous jobs and employment for their entire life. There was no other model in my head. So I was only trying to play the game within that world, right? So I'm just trying to optimize and do the best. Like, I didn't realize then that I had this hunger and drive that was being applied to the dumbest goals in the world. And once I went to business school, I thought, I'm not going to go back into consulting. I'm just going to keep moving around. But I didn't come up with any idea of what I wanted to do.
And I mean, that's a pretty high bar though, because when you say dumbest goals in the world, like my mind goes towards like I want to like really stupid shit. But you were still at McKinsey, and like that's
silly goals, not the dumbest goals. The thing is, everyone in society will praise you for pursuing those goals. So if you're questioning them, people think you're crazy, but they dismiss you. Then when you walk away, then people think you're actually crazy, which is what happened 5 years later. But yeah, I graduated from business school, ended up at a small consulting firm. The funny thing was I got rejected by the company I was working for before business school, basically because they were evaluating me against all the peers in the business school. And I was just sort of lazy. I wasn't fired up to follow that path. I was kind of just bumbling along. So I worked in that path for 5 more years. My last job, I was making $150,000 advising CEOs and boards of big companies. I was totally bored by the people I was working with. I didn't aspire to be anyone around me. It was older men who were grumpy, not in shape, and complained a lot. And I was inspired by Maury Schwartz. I kept reading that book, but I couldn't figure out, like, I was stuck without knowing I was stuck, if that makes sense.
Let's dial it back. What made you first pick that book up?
So this is a very popular book. I don't think it's crazy that I picked it up. I think I read it in college or slightly after. And it was a book I kept returning to for some reason. I think I've just been inspired by older men who are still alive and energized with their life.
Define energized.
You know it when you see it, right? You're like, they're talking to people, they're excited about things in life. They're not saying things like, "Oh, you're having a kid, never gonna sleep again, buddy." Right?
Dude, how many times have you heard that?
It's sad, and it makes me sad. And it's the same kind of talk with work. It's like when you're graduating, welcome to the real world, buddy. It's like there actually are other types of adults who don't.
Not on the East Coast.
The Northeast. The Northeast has an extra amount of cynicism compared to the rest of the U.S. And I now realize this after living abroad and being in a place like Austin. Oh, cynicism isn't the default mode of orienting towards life. And I don't thrive in that environment. I totally underestimated how much I needed to be around optimistic people. And I only realized that once I became self-employed and I realized I needed energy to actually do anything I was doing. And I became a lot more conscious and intentional about surrounding myself by those people.
There's so many ways that I could go with this. For those that don't know, Paul is also expecting his first child. So when we were laughing about the people kind of being cynical of we're never going to sleep again, I have the view that it's just seasons. There's seasons to life.
Of course.
So you just have to be prepared. And it's just like, it reminds me of, you go back hundreds of years and you're growing crops. You're doing hours and hours and hours of labor before you get to taste the fruit, the veggies, the cream of the crop rise to the top. And I believe that work is very similar to that. So is having a child. It's just like those first 8 to 12 weeks is going to be a grind, but how do you prepare yourself for that? And then also with work, we don't do a good job, I think, of teaching people that there are seasons to life. And one of the things that I've heard you say on other podcasts that I really like that you said this, because there's two ways to be cynical. There's cynical of people looking down on the way that we're going. And then we can become cynical of this is the only way, like fuck the corporate path. And I don't know if that was your view, like when you first started, but knowing you now and hearing what you've said, I sympathize with this because I felt like if I were to quit today, quote unquote quit,
yeah,
it probably would have looked different because you resigned in 2017 too.
Yeah.
The world is so fluid now that like,
so much more accepting.
Yeah. It's like, I don't even know if I would have quit because there's more opportunity to have different roles and remote roles and like part-time roles and things like that.
I think about this too. If my job was remote and I could live in different places, I might still be employed, which is really cool. And I talk to a lot of people who are in that situation and they've actually leaned into the opportunities that it gives them. Now, there are a lot of people that are just working remotely and performing office work. But other people are that slight imagination is creeping into their brain and they're saying, well, maybe I can go somewhere for a month.
Yeah, you're spot on. And one, if you're listening to this, you can do it. Like one of the things that I always lead by here at Thrive, like somebody out there has already done what you're trying to do. Just go find them and talk to them, and that'll help a lot. But you mentioned in your book how most people have a narrow lens of what work is. And I have felt this like so much being in the health and wellness space and the media space, because I traded engineering at first for personal training. And people, including people close to me, are like, dude, you're giving up like everything you worked for to like train people. And what they couldn't understand was I wasn't training people. I was changing their lives. They literally, when they came to me, they weren't just talking about how do I get abs? How do I look more fit? They were like, I have this problem at work. Like, I don't know what to do about it. I'm having this problem in my relationship. I don't know what to do about it. Like, I was their sounding board. And I was also helping them feel more confident to show up in their daily lives and conquer the problems that they're having. Why do people narrow into like that? Like for me, they're like, that's not good enough in my world of what I'm viewing as what work actually is.
I think it's very simple why people narrow into. So our society has basically narrowed and simplified our view of work as employment in a full-time job. And that's the reality. So the reality is if you want to lean against that, you are going to pay some sort of cost. I say there's a status tax. Both of us have probably paid a status tax, but that is a tax in other people's eyes. And once you figure out how to deal with that, it's uncomfortable, right? When people are disappointed in you and say things to you like, don't you feel like you're wasting your education? It hurts, but you can also learn to deal with that and realize that aiming your life based on other people's opinions of you probably isn't a good long-term strategy. So I can tie this back to what you were saying before, were you opposed to the corporate world earlier? When I left my job, I wanted to light the corporate world on fire. I was so broken that I needed to like start an internal war against the corporate world. I understand what was happening now. What was happening is that I was scared of going back. And I sort of needed to burn the bridges in my head that it wasn't possible. I was scared of becoming the person I felt like I was becoming on the previous path. And that scared the hell out of me. I was going to become that cynical middle-aged man. I saw traces of it. I wasn't really that person. My friends wouldn't say I was that person, but I saw the traces and it scared me. And so when I left, I was like, corporate world sucks, quit your job, all these things. What I didn't anticipate was that when I took a break, so after 6 months, I had made some money freelancing and I just had this intuition that I needed to not work and not do anything. In that space, I started writing and getting energized by all these things. And it was this awakening that, holy crap, there's a different kind of work, right? And it's enabled me to see that a lot of our default scripts about how we see the world are so anchored in these very dumbed down versions of employment and work that are really tied to the 20th century industrial economy. Ambition, the way we think of it, is like job titles, rising incomes, all this stuff. Nonsense. The true ambition, which we've lost track of, is the stuff that lights your heart on fire.
Most people think ambition, in this, you write about prestige in the book, and I feel like most people tie their ambition to some type of prestige rather than tying their ambition to when they wake up every single day. And if you like had a free day, how would you want to spend that day? Like, what are you motivated to do on a free day? And for some people that could just be, I just want to do nothing and walk around the block. Like, cool. But that's where I feel like for me, my ambition used to, and that hit home well, is like, I love the definition in the book where it was talking about it like warps our view of what we actually want. That's what ended me up. Like I played college soccer. It wasn't even my favorite sport, but I went for the prestige of thinking, oh, I can get a scholarship for soccer and then I can accomplish these things where people are looking at me and I can get this job for being a scholar athlete. But I didn't love the sport.
And I think some of that is unavoidable, I think, especially for young men. We just have this desire to prove ourselves, right? And prestige is basically what are people paying attention to? Things we put prestige on basically mean a lot of people are paying attention to it. Generally, when you don't know what you're doing, aiming in a prestigious direction like neutral in whether that's good or bad. It's fine, right? A lot of prestigious jobs will enable you to develop skills, right? And aim high, try to do good work, things like that. Strategy consulting was definitely that for me. The problem is there are no off ramps. There are no easy off ramps, right? And I essentially had to build my own off ramps and make sense of all this stuff. This is what's injected into my book, is essentially the fumbling around, not knowing what I'm doing, being confused, and then starting to talk to people. This was before the pandemic too. So I'd have all these one-on-one conversations and everyone would be like, yeah, you're onto something. I feel this too, even if they're in jobs or not on jobs. And I realized there was this hidden conversation of people talking about their relationship to work that was not making it above the surface level. Hushed conversations in back rooms. I shouldn't say I don't like my job. I get paid well, all this. But I'm being verbally abused and it's terrible. I'm gaining weight. It's like, no, you should be saying this. You shouldn't be ashamed of complaining about your experience and wanting more. And what I've realized more recently, a term I coined in the last year, is there's this inspiration deficit. So many young people want to do things that are excellent. They want to do great work. They want to aim high, but they're often trapped in these paths which guarantee safety and security, at least on the surface, that don't deliver on that. And it's a tragedy.
You mentioned fumbling, and it got me thinking. You've lived in so many different cities. I'd love for people to understand practically what fumbling looks like, because most people don't allow themselves. We're not allowed to fumble at all, like in our lives. It just goes from day one, kindergarten, first grade, like we got to be on this path, college, job, and beyond, white picket fence. But fumbling is so vitally important. And we do it, I would say, before we get to kindergarten. As a kid, you're fumbling.
Oh, yeah.
A little child, you're fumbling almost everything. We put a plant right near our new couch, and it the pollen got on the couch and started staining it. And I was like, well, this is a sign that we're about to have a child. We need to find some good stain remover, because I was like, this is not the last time that there's going to be a stain here. But I giggled when I say that about my child. Why can't we giggle about that when we're an adult? And I feel like a lot of it is we need more people like yourself, who have been to McKinsey and then have done this other path. But the reality is, like, you didn't just get here and show up and the world is great. It's like, no, you fumbled your way forward and allowed yourself. The way to fumble is allowing yourself to fumble. So what did some of those practically look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think so many people are scared to look bad as an adult, especially if you've had some success. And I felt that viscerally after I quit my job. What you realize is that when you're employed, especially on a successful path, there is this unwritten, like unspoken support for you. There's this natural encouragement because you're doing what's expected, and you feel it. As soon as you step away, that dissipates. And what's was really hard for me is there was no active support. I had a couple people say encouraging things to me, but 99% silent. And it was scary. I needed more support. So I went out in search of finding the other people. And when I quit my job, I didn't have any work lined up. A month in, I'm sort of panicking. I'm like, what was I doing? I'm an idiot. And that drove me into overdrive to try. I was in New York City. And I didn't even lower my cost of living that much. I did a little, but I was burning money fast. So I freaked out. And this is fumbling, right? You realize you can actually take action. If you're running out of cash and you don't want to go broke, you'll make changes. This is the thing people don't realize. You'll stop going to restaurants. You'll start cooking. You'll sublet your place and move to Boston and move in with 4 other people in their early 20s with 1 bathroom. That's what I did. And I lowered my cost of living by 50%. I reached out to a crazy amount of people. I found one client. I found money. Sort of proved to myself, okay, you can make this freelance thing work. And then a couple of my projects were ending at the same time. December, it was about 7 months after quitting. And I just decided, what if I stop working? And for that next year, I essentially did one project and made $20,000 for it was about 15 months. I did one project that took 3 months, made about $20,000 to $25,000. And I just wrote. I wandered. I took a 1-month trip to Asia. But at the same time, I didn't feel that great about myself. I was still in opposition to the default world. I was living in the US before I moved to Asia, about a year and a half after I quit my job. And in the US, I still felt this tension of you should be working. If you're not productive, you're not making money, you're not a good person. I felt bad about myself.
You're playing defense, not offense. Like you're defending, you're kind of like in your head, you're defending, okay, here's why I did this. But in my head, offense is like, you're not even I know this, like I shifted. It was almost like a turnover. I went from playing defense to, I don't even think about that world anymore. Yeah. And I just attack what I'm passionate about and what I'm invested in. So I wholeheartedly know that feeling. When did that transition for you?
Yeah. And I think this is a phase a lot of people need to go through. For me, it took 2 years and then realistically 4 years, which is really slow. But I share all my income.
That's college. Like people spend $100,000 in 4 years of their time.
That's a great point. And
that's not that we say that's long. Because I've talked about this in the podcast before. Most people would be like, oh, that's so long. But I'd be like, I went to college for 5.5 years.
I love that reframe. And this is the thing, right? I went to business school for 2 years. I got a scholarship being part of this program, but I went into debt for $70,000. I paid 20 grand out of pocket. So when I graduated, I was 27 and 70 grand in debt, right? That is a very high status, impressive thing to do. Not work for 2 years and go to business school and go into debt. Now, what I did, no, it's crazy, right? And I wandered the world for a few years, did a bunch of experiments, learned about myself, challenged myself, dealt with feeling uncomfortable, pushed myself. I became more resilient. I found my wife. We fell in love. We got married. And I more or less broke even in 3 years. That is incredible. College is pretty fun, but this is better than grad school.
I've wised up over the years. Like there's no right or wrong way. Like whatever, if you're listening to this, like your choices for education is not the issue that I have a problem with. It's the system and the mindset that's really frustrating to me. And you touched on earlier when people comment, but what are you going to, like, what about your education? Everything that you paid for. But the reality is I've learned so much more. Like if you took my life and you outlined the 12 years of school in my hometown, then the 5 years at college, and then some corporate life, within a 6-year span of like going on my own, I've learned probably 10x more than I did before because of what you were talking about earlier, like the culture of creating your own. I created my own culture of what education is and what I love to do. And that's where I think, man, that's what you did, where you travel around and you can give yourself 2, 4, 6 years to kind of wander. And this is why I love my podcast or any podcast, because we're getting to people when they can do it. I'm not saying if you're 50 and have 3 kids, like go quit your job. Like that's not what I'm here to do. It's more so
you'd be surprised at how many of those people email me.
Yeah.
Every week.
It's a tougher problem to solve for sure.
The thing I've realized is there's a certain personality type that just has this itch and they never resolve the itch. It never goes away, right? So it's really just a question of when and how. And when they're reaching out to me, these people are not saying, well, aren't you worried about this? Aren't you worried about that? Those people, honestly, I don't know how to help them. Maybe you're better at that. But I am so passionate about the people that come to me and say, look, here's my situation. I've worked for 25 years. I was talking to somebody that worked 25 years and is looking to remix stuff. Now his kids are a little older. And he goes, I just need like feedback on my approaches, how I'm thinking about this. And I'm like, that is awesome. I love that. There's way more of that in the past few years. But I always tell people it might be terrible in the short term. You might feel really bad. You might struggle. You might feel like a failure. You might not be able to see where you're headed, but it might be worth it.
The archetype that you're describing to me sounds like, well, clearly they're a bit older. They might have kids. They have more life experience, which builds a confidence. People our age or younger that have kind of had that itch, they lack true life experience, a lot of them, and then they also lack like the business experience. So it's like,
me.
Yeah,
I lacked life experience.
But in business, like you had McKinsey, like, so there's some people that come to me and it's like, they don't have McKinsey, they have the itch and they don't have the life experience. So that's where it's like, kind of like they're just spinning wheels. But I loved your reframe earlier. Most of them, what they're not willing to do, and in the book you talk about that as well, is just like going more so from the framework of what do you not want to do? And I think not enough people actually think about that. And if they thought about this, you might like this. When I talk about like your job or somebody that has a job, the first thing I talk about is your commute. Because a lot of people will complain about their commute. And then I'll say the statistic of car accidents and risking your life for that commute. So when you do the framework of like
weight gain too.
Yeah, weight gain. Anything, like you can like statistically be like across the board.
Just go to PubMed and search commute.
Is that worth? Now, if you can wholeheartedly say, yes, it's worth it right now because the job that I love is something I love. Or the second part is like, this job gets me to what I love, because that's an alternative as well. But yeah, man, I love this topic so much, and just going through kind of some of the stuff. I think something that I personally wanted to ask you is, what were some of the hard parts when you were outside of the country? Because that is not something I've experienced, and I want to kind of live through you vicariously. What were some of the things that created difficulty when you were not in the U.S.?
So being out of the U.S. was almost categorically great. That's when things really opened up for me. And the thing, connecting this to, in my book, I write, who do you serve, right? And this is a big part about building your own culture, is figuring out who don't you serve, right? A lot of people have this mass culture mindset, which is like, if you're going to do something, you got to fit in with everyone. If you're going to say something, you have to reach everyone. People will say to me, don't you think you shouldn't say this about these kind of people? I'm pretty sure there are enough people to reach. 10,000 people bought my book, which is mind-blowing to me. And that could support someone in a year to live a
Why did 10,000 people buy your book?
I don't know. It's
okay. You're not giving yourself enough credit here. You're a sharp ass man. Like,
I did. If you had asked me a year ago, so this is what's today? The 12th. I launched it on the 13th last year. I had pre-sold 100 and then accidentally launched my book on Amazon because I didn't know it just launches on paperback. You can't do a pre-sale. So I just launched it and I said, screw it. I'll do a 2-day pre-sale on the Kindle. I sold like 50 of those. So I sold 150 books. If you had told me you'll sell 1,000 in the year, that would have been 100 out of 100 for me and a victory. I think what I underestimated, and I was sort of feeling this in the pandemic, was that the conversation I was talking about before, that hidden conversation, suddenly wasn't hidden anymore, and it was in public. And people were using my book as an excuse to share it with other people. I had so many messages that said, I bought 5 copies for friends, which is essentially the only tactic to grow a book, word of mouth. Over time, you can do launch strategy, whatever. Ryan Holiday says this thing around a good launch strategy can get you a few hundred reviews, but only a good book can get you several thousand, right? So people saw my book as permission to talk about this and share it with people, which I totally underestimated.
I'm not letting you get away with this. I asked you about living overseas and the struggles. You said it was great, so I want to dial into that. But
this connects back to my writing too.
And it also will connect. I have another question on the book thing, because I feel like what you experience there is going to lead into why the book is doing well.
Yeah. So who don't you serve, right? When I was still in the US, I moved to Boston a couple of months after quitting my job, spent most of that year in Boston. And then August 2018, about a year and a couple months after quitting my job, I decided to go to Taiwan after visiting. I loved Taiwan. I just felt pulled there. And I didn't have a plan. I didn't have any work lined up. When I got there, I didn't end up doing any paid work for about 3 months, mostly because I couldn't figure out how to do virtual consulting. People just weren't hiring remote consultants at that point. Got to be in the office. 2018. Yeah. And I woke up most days and wandered. And I fell in love with writing. That was the thing I kept wanting to do. I would wake up and be so excited about opening my laptop and just writing.
Did you write when you were a kid?
Not really. There's a lot on computers. There are a few moments I can connect the dots. I started writing in college. I wrote a couple things for fun that I just stand out in my mind so powerfully. I had a blog we were screwing around. I had a Tumblr after college. I did a blog for my business school. I wrote on Quora for fun on the side. So it's so obvious looking back, but it wasn't until that time. And I came up with this mantra then of write most days. And that directly led to all this success with the writing. But I didn't make any money on writing until 2022, which is really the 7th year I'd been writing consistently. I started writing the 2 of the last years of my job. And in Taiwan, I read this book by William Zinsser on writing well. And he goes, writing is an act of ego. You might as well admit it and let it rip, right? And like just own your personality and what you actually believe. And it was this unlock for me. It's like, oh, I should say what I actually think, right? And it was this huge release where it's like, and living in Taiwan helped with this because I don't know the default soup of what I'm supposed to do, the culture there. I didn't grow up there, but walking around in Boston, I know everyone thinks how what you're seeing is successful, all these things, all that fell away. There was a lightness living in Taiwan. I was an outsider and that freed me a little. So I was like, yeah, just say what I think. And there was a looseness and just like a reconnection with myself. And I don't think it's a surprise that a month into that is when I also ended up meeting my now wife, who I'm having a child with.
Where'd you meet her?
We met on Tinder. We had a first date at a tea shop, and we just had this. It was amazing from the beginning. And the funny thing was, she saw all these like credentials on my Tinder profile because it links to your job and school, right? And she goes, I'll go, but this guy's just going to be another like expat douchebag. And she was thinking of quitting her job. And she's like, yeah, I just want to quit my job and read all day. I'm like, let's go. And the first few weeks were her skipping work and we're just wandering around, going on bike rides, reading in the park, going to all these cool things around Taiwan. And meeting her was just so powerful because it was permission. She liked who I was showing up with. And the funny thing is she didn't really know how I was telling her kind kind of struggling, don't know who I am. I'm trying to figure out all these things. I don't really know what the future looks like. She didn't care. She kind of like saw me. And that has been the ultimate superpower my entire relationship. She's still so supportive. If I went and like took a job and didn't try harder on my current path, she'd probably fight me. And it's just so powerful to have.
I'd love to
that
see
support.
that. What is she like? How many weeks pregnant now?
She'd probably beat me up. She's capoeira and
yeah, dude. She came to the New Year's Day workout. I loved it.
She was the toughest one at her and Aaron both.
Well, I mean, yeah,
I'm
we'll
like,
never know. We'll never know experience what that's like.
So much tougher
in this lifetime, but it is very inspiring and motivational. And I love that how supportive she is of your path. I can testify to how much that means. I wouldn't be. None of what I do would exist without Aaron. And I think that doesn't get talked as much either. Which is an interesting thread to go down. I think naturally it's getting talked about a little bit more. Again, a lot of the things we're talking about when you're talking about jobs and relationships, like cultural norms take kind of decades to change. And that's where with work, what I've seen is during the pandemic, it forced a lot of people, and this is my kind of like hypothesis of why your book would take off, is that pandemic gave people the pause that they needed to ask themselves the questions that you and I were already asking.
Right.
We had the itch for during the pandemic. I think people who didn't even have an itch started getting the free time to like come out of the fog and start asking themselves questions. And that's where.
So before we jump into that, I saw this. I had the craziest experience having written about this. And this is why I kind of knew the book would resonate. I'd been writing about these things from 2017 to 2020. April 2020, I had these booking links on my site. Anyone could book a call with me every Wednesday. I didn't really have a following. I had less than a couple thousand people on all different platforms. And I'd get one a month, maybe a few a month, and then 8 calls every week. It was crazy.
So you went from, I mean, that's a percentage increase, right? 1 per month to 8 times 4.
Yeah, it was like 20 to 30 a month. People were messaging me. They're finding my stuff. They're reading all my articles. And 2020 was an explosion for me. I'm talking to all these people, so I'm getting all the info ahead of everyone else. The news media is always nonsense on work. They're talking about a great resignation. There's no great resignation. There's weird stuff happening in the labor market. But what's happening is a great contemplation. There's a sort of bubbling under the surface that hasn't even shown its wings yet. People are starting to make moves from the questions they started asking 2 years ago. Those are the interesting things. That's the real great resignation that's going to like occur over the next decade. But it's slow, right? You get those questions and you start thinking and it bubbles over time. And I was able to just absorb and sort of just be a vehicle and a node for these topics and these information. And I think what resonates too is I'm not a very hustle person. I'm default skeptical of hustle culture because far too many people quit their jobs and then just become workaholics working on their own, maxing on income and things like that. I ultimately think that's the path to burnout. The only path to sustainability on your own path is designing around work that actually brings you alive. And finding that is not trivial, hard, but it is possible. Many people have talked about it through history, and it is worth finding.
How does somebody find work that makes them feel alive when they don't even know what it feels like to feel alive in the first place?
I don't know. It's a damn hard question. But that was me, and I was willing to fumble in the darkness. I didn't know that was what I'm aiming for. The biggest hack I've ever seen is travel, not a vacation, not going a place for a week and going to hyper scheduled vacation, travel and just exist in a different environment. Chronic illness, pretty effective. That worked for me. I was sick for a couple of years after grad school, and that opened my windows a little more. I don't suggest getting chronic illness to have an awakening, but sabbaticals are probably the quickest way to transform your relationship with work. Minimum 3 months.
That's a good transition where I asked, like, how does somebody find work when they're not alive, if they don't know what it feels, find work that makes them feel alive if they don't know what that feels like in the first place. Suffering. Knowing what it's like to feel so bad that almost death seems like a better alternative. That's something that unfortunately I've experienced, and that lit a fire under my ass. I knew.
Because you're willing to fight for a day of feeling great, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then once you experience that physically, you want it emotionally.
You don't want to go back.
No.
So one of the things that I've asked multiple guests before on this show is, can somebody get to that point without suffering, or is suffering needed? Do we have to suffer to get to that point of whether it's work making me feel alive or my relationship making me feel alive? Like, is there some sort of suffering that has to happen? What's your view on that?
I think suffering is a tough word because it can mean a lot to a lot of people. I think there's a whole tribe of sufferists in the world, which are you probably see this in the fitness world, right? Yeah, you gotta grind, right? And people are getting smarter with this, right? Like, you were somebody that motivated me to get like a Whoop watch. And if you work out too hard, it says, okay, take it easier this day, and you'll actually succeed in your fitness goals over the long term probably more quickly, right? And a lot of people pair work with suffering, and they don't realize they have this hidden script. And when they become self-employed, they make it a struggle again, and they're suffering, right? I always start with, what if it were easy? And so that doesn't directly answer the question. I don't think suffering is inherently needed to get to a better relationship with work or a better place in your life. I think challenges and having to overcome things and figure things out inevitably come in everyone's life.
I liked I like the full response, but your initial remark of it means something different to everybody.
Yeah.
And that's where I kind of fall in that same boat where, like, to me, we've grown up in a world where work means suffering. Like,
yeah, right.
But we live in a reality where we're blessed with technologies and creative endeavors that 50 years ago you didn't have. So work doesn't have to be a sufferfest, like kind of like what you were describing.
There's a legacy of an attachment to that, right? So the thing I'm careful to point out is the boomer generation even had less options for work.
Mm-hmm.
My father didn't graduate from college. He went to work at a manufacturing plant. There was a certain amount of grind that he didn't have a choice.
But because he didn't have a choice, quote unquote, like it just physically, there was no remote work.
Right.
So
there were less
was
options.
it viewed as suffering then? Or was it just viewed as like, this is just every day?
Right. Because everyone else is doing it. Right. So there's a cultural, and you see this in the knowledge work world too, professional worlds, where people sort of like compare, I'm so busy. Like there's this shared like cohesion around normalizing it. Right. And I just don't think the suffering of working hard in a field to like get the food for your agricultural output, if you're working in a farm 100 years ago, is the same as struggling on the dumbest stuff on PowerPoint slides for insecure grown men for like a client presentation. We just need to get serious about this. Some of this stuff doesn't matter, right? And suffering on the things that don't matter to you, you have to figure out what matters to you, is not something worth doing. There's all this cynicism from older generations. Back in my day, we struggled, right? We had to put in the work. Okay, but I don't want my kids to suffer on dumb stuff if they don't have to. Like the thing in the beginning of my book, it's saying, my parents figured it out. They gave us a great life. They did sacrifice. They did suffer within the context of their environment. But they gave me more space to dream than they did, right? But they were still a little bit uncomfortable with me stepping into those dreams.
To me, when I interpret your brand, the book, and like suffering, the greatest amount of suffering is going down the path that isn't yours.
Yeah.
Because you're talking decades of time where it's not, and it's silent suffering. Like that's where, going back to the definition of, it could mean multiple things to different people. To me, that's what that means. I suffer, like, if we're going to break it down, we were talking about fitness, right? There's a lot of things that I do that people, on the outside, it looks like suffering, like it's hard, but it doesn't even come close to having to show up to the job that I used to have to show up to, or that commute.
Yeah.
And going back to the disease, like an illness, I had gastro problems. I have celiac disease, and I was anxious every day driving to work, like, oh, I'm gonna have to pull over and go use the restroom, and then I'm going to a job that isn't fulfilling. But to other people, it's like, oh, well, you're driving a Lexus, you're in air conditioned, like you have money, like that's not suffering. But in my head, I was like, I'd rather go back to sleeping on a couch in college with $0 and like trying to solve problems that I'm actually passionate about doing. So I love how you kind of dialed that in, because anybody listening on the other end of this, you can attach yourself to whatever suffering is for you. And also, I think the beauty of that is it can be a positive or a negative. And that's not something that we're taught. We're not taught, you mentioned the word challenge, to do things that are challenging without a result attached to it. We're taught, go to MIT because the result will be
good. Yeah.
People will think of you in a certain way. But if you were like, I want to learn how to climb a mountain. I want to go climb a mountain. What's the material result of that?
Yeah.
Why do you want to do that?
Or,
you're going to like take a month to go quit your job to go do that? Why?
Or write consistently for 7 years without trying to get published or
the writing thing
for it.
is really interesting, because for me, it's been like media overall. When on top of the personal training, it was like, you're just making like you're quitting your job to like make posts on these different platforms.
Well, this is why I never dunk on anyone actually putting themselves out there in an authentic way. Because when people first start doing it, they look silly, right? And your stuff is bad. But that's the hardest part. And when you share, you inspire others, you connect with others, you give other people permission to do great things, right? And the path to great work is through ugly work. And that's why people look at people creating online and say, there's too many scammers, all grifters. It's like, well, that's exactly why you should share online, because you're already defended against that. You're not going to be grifty or scammy or hustly. You probably have something worth saying, right? And yeah, it's amazing. I'm glad people like you exist. It's easier to find people like you. The whole reason I'm in Austin, I had some soft connections, is that I had internet friends here who were alive and energized. And
How'd you find Squatch?
Alex Hardy. He's like, he's my on-ramp to Austin. And he's on a sabbatical right now. He went to Costa Rica after leaving his job. I'm pumped for him. He's somebody that's been super thoughtful about his path and really has this deep desire to like bring a lot alive. So,
do you know how Squatch started?
Jason, right? And his coffee shop, or?
Yeah, so it's kind of a culmination of the Pathless Path.
I love it.
Which is attracting the Pathless Path, Pathless Paul.
Yeah, I feel so at home there.
Yeah, so total sidebar, but it applies. During the pandemic, obviously, like the world is kind of flipping on its head.
Oh, because of Noah, you mean?
No. Noah wasn't in Austin either. He got called just like you did. But Jason owner of Buzzmill, was having people over his house to work out. He created a group because he wanted to just, obviously, like, we're all trying to find connection during that time. And his wife didn't like, after a while, that so many people were coming over to work out. So he's like, I'm going to start. I think there was a Squatch before Squatch. There was a different facility that was for him and some of the workers at the Buzzmill. Could be getting this wrong, but that's through the grapevine. But then Jason found the warehouse, and there was no turf, there was no sauna, there was nothing. It was literally just that warehouse and like a skeleton of a gym. And the number one thing that Jason did, and this is again going back to, if you're considering finding a new path or have an itch like we were describing, like reach out to Paul, reach out to myself, and lean on other people that have already done it. Jason was like, I've never run a gym or opened a gym. I know business. I own this other spot. But what he allowed for is people to come in and make it their own. So like we created our own culture there because it was basically a bunch of misfits who didn't really align with everywhere else. Like for me, the attraction was I get to work out in the sun with my shoes off and my shirt off and talk to people and actually grow my mind and my body at the same time. Yeah. And it just naturally attracted that. And then obviously if those are the type of people attracted in the beginning, it just spreads like wildfire. Like one of our sayings is like, we want to increase collisions of trailblazers.
I love that.
So we want to increase the amount of collisions of Paul running into somebody that he's going to really vibe with, and then Paul bringing somebody else in that they're going to vibe with, and so on and so forth.
It's amazing. I've never felt at home in a gym. I'm not like a gym guy. I don't like hanging out at the gym, but I'm drawn to that place. And I just feel like it's a place I'm supposed to be going. I can't explain it, but I love that. It's cool to hear that. I thought it started many years before, so it's cool to hear it's very recent.
No, it was kind of out of rebellion. It started out of a little bit of a rebellion of like, this is what health is. This is what we really think that health should look like.
And this is a big thing too, is not being against things. So being against things can be a good starting point, right? So you're against not being able to work out or things like that. You're against working in the corporate world. That's where I started. Eventually what I realized is that I needed to be for things. So this brings me back to Taiwan. I took a consulting project paying $7,500 that would more or less pay my bills for 4 or 5 months living in Taiwan. It was very cheap. But I just had so much resistance. I had this gut feeling I shouldn't do it. And as soon as I took the project, I was like, I don't want to do another project like this. It was kind of a project I could crush. I'm good at it. I know how to do it, but that's why I left the corporate world. And it lit a fire in me. I realized I didn't want to play accountant of my life anymore. I didn't want to micromanage costs because that was a scarcity mindset, Paul. And that is when things shifted for me to this abundance mindset. I want to be for things. I want to aim at things. I want to be bolder out there. And a bunch of people emailed me when I started unleashing this. Something new in your writing. I sense it. Can't quite pinpoint it. And that was really encouraging. That kept me going for a couple of years. And just kept slowly, stubbornly working on only the things I liked and was so protective of that. And I just kept that going. Now, the thing I always tell people is I don't know if you can make a living following that approach, but why not try for a few years?
The key word there is what's a living. Like some people a living is 20,000.
Well, I just talked to a woman this morning, Michelle Varhus, who's written a lot about sabbaticals, and she's living in the US right now. She spent $12,000 last year.
Wow. That's impressive.
And there's many such cases. I meet these people because they find me and they reach out to me and they're willing to...
$1,000 a month. Yeah.
She's living in the middle of nowhere in California and living with her sister. Doesn't eat out. She did take one trip to Hawaii. I think she had some points, but it's possible.
Yeah,
I met a woman that traveled continuously around the globe for $14,000. Another person I interviewed on my podcast.
I really like your framework of for, not against, because like I wouldn't be for that. I'm more of the how do I make a lot and experience a lot and not have to even think about
Yeah.
expenses. But for other people, when you think of the for mindset, the possibilities out there for people are really what matter. And when we talk against things, it limits the possibilities that we can see.
Yeah, and for some people, money is a very emotional thing, right? Money can have different purposes for different people. I am not super motivated to make the most amount of money as possible. I'm willing to turn down opportunities to like optimize for energy. And you can be like, I still didn't increase my salary after turning down that consulting project. My income dipped even further, and I was still micromanaging my expenses. But at the edges, I wasn't trying to save $5 here and there. Right? I was loosening up a little and loosening up into myself, dreaming a little more, imagining things, what could be, what might be possible. But it was still super cheap about money because I was willing to pay that cost to protect the space and time needed to cultivate creative acts, which was, I just had this sense that I needed to keep writing. I didn't know why.
Follow obsession.
It's curiosity. Curiosity chooses you, and you don't really have a choice, right? And once that happens, I just want to follow that slipstream as long as possible.
Tell me a little bit about the gift economy.
Yeah. So, and this is a big unlock for me as well. And just toying with all these experiments. Part of what attracted me to the gift economy was a rejection of the corporate world, which is just maximize profit, optimize more and more and more. The default is more money, more profit. The reality is you don't need to maximize revenue or profit as a business. There's no law. There's no law of the universe that makes you do this. People just default to that, right? There are businesses that don't optimize for those and still do great. Now, I just wanted to reject against like charging for stuff, and I just wanted to give to people. I've always been somebody that just wants to help and give and support people. So I just embraced this idea of the gift economy. I read about it in Charles Eisenstein's book, The Sacred Economics, right? And the gift in our families, you don't charge people for, if you have friends over, you don't say, all right, thank you for coming over for dinner. $27 for you, $34 for you.
I mean, did you live with roommates in college? Because we definitely did that. No, I'm just kidding. Sometimes we did that.
Yeah, eventually, when you're super poor, you gotta count. You gotta count the bills, right?
This is my egg, and like your ramen.
Yeah, that definitely happens, right?
Sorry, it was just making fun.
No, it's true. And sometimes when people do that, they can destroy a friendship.
Yep.
Because they've severed an understanding of a deeper game you were playing, right? A deeper game of, we're in this for the long haul. That's why my cousin, I think I quote him in the book, it'll even out when we're dead. Mm-hmm. Love that. It's like, why the hell are we keeping track of $4 here and $7 there, right? And so the gift economy says give first. Don't expect anything back. You are giving wholeheartedly and just giving and just trying to send love with that message, whether it's money, whether it's gifts, or whether it's time. A lot of people do this with their time, and that's beautiful. I did it with a couple projects. Somebody wanted to pay me $1,000 to write this future of work report. I didn't really have any opportunities, so I said yes to it, but I said, will you experiment with this gift economy with me? I just thought $1,000 was like super shitty, low pay for what was probably going to be a large amount of work. It was going to come down to, I don't know, $5 to $10 an hour for work. So I said, we do this gift economy with thing where I just give it to you. At the end, I send you a form and just say, what did it feel like to work with Paul? What are you willing to give wholeheartedly? And they ended up giving me $2,000, right? And the interesting thing is not that exchange. The interesting thing is not that exchange. It's the feelings. It's like you have all these feelings. Oh, I'm going to get ripped off. What if they take advantage of me? What if they pay me less? And realizing we're especially in the US, we're these trained consumers that are protecting ourselves. You can't charge me this for that. I'm going to get ripped off. Don't get taken advantage of. We have all these scripts, right? And just releasing them, right? And I talk about giving $100 to a stranger I met on couchsurfing because she said she was broke, and she took it. She accepted it, and it felt so good. It's amazing. I've never talked to her again, but she emailed me a few weeks later, and she's like, I use your money to apply for this home sharing thing, and I have this three months free house stay. I have no idea what she's up to, but it's like, that's cool. Hopefully she spread it on and just like we don't need to turn everything into a transaction, right?
Do anyone in your family watch the news?
Oh, of course. Many are addicted.
Facts. So the reason I bring the news up is what you're talking about is leaving a positive ripple.
Yeah.
And
the news does not do that.
yes, but the people that watch the news sit there and complain because they want a better world. When the reality is, I'm tying this concept back to the beginning of when you first open up a little bit, is you can take action.
Yeah.
You don't need permission. So the permission to give, isn't it crazy that we have these things in our heads that tell us that we shouldn't give?
Yeah.
That there's all these reasons not to give. So for me, when I analyze that, it's because of we have all these people that complain about the world, about how the world is operating, and then they're sitting there waiting for that screen to give them permission to say, okay, I can give. And insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So they sit there in front of the screen, and the screen can look a million different ways. It can be your teachers, your books, the people you hang around. The information that you're getting could be a million different ways. You're not going to get, like, if you want something different out of life, you have to do something differently. And that's where, when you were talking about the gifting economy, it really hit home with me, because for me, like, I think that's been a huge struggle of mine to describe to other people, because even in,
you're very good at this. You're an incredibly generous person.
And I like to think, I appreciate that. I would say that it stems from, I had a reflection. I analyze and reflect a lot. And I was given a life that, I mean, we're super middle class, but both my parents were there.
Yeah.
They're still together today. And there was a lot of love and a lot of hard times, but they also did a really good job of showing me what life could have been. We lived in a diverse town, and like I could see and feel what real stress was like. And that's where I also knew other people that were above us, I would say. I don't like that word, because I don't think anybody's above or below, but when you're younger and you're like sifting out your friend groups, you can just tell that some people are a little bit more well off and others aren't, right? So what ended up happening was I viewed it as the ripple effect since I was young. That's why I have literally the ripple tattoo on my hand, is people would give to me, I'd reflect and be like, oh, that was like really kind of them. Like, what can I do? And the framework that I've used over the years, it applies to the corporate world, it applies to school, because I've heard so many people like, I'm not valuable. And this applies to like when you quit too. I have no skills, or I don't know how to be valuable to other people. And when I was younger, it stemmed from, I would tutor kids. One of my entrances into entrepreneurship was I would tutor younger kids. So I wasn't valuable to my peers or the people above me, but I could tutor someone younger. So if you're listening to this and you're in college, you can be valuable to a high school. If you're a young professional, like if your first year, Paul at McKinsey, like you can help somebody that's applying to McKinsey.
Yeah.
Why do we not talk about that as being valuable though? Like, I feel like I have a lot of friends that intrinsically do that, but it's not talked about like in schools or in jobs about how to be intrinsically giving, and that value right there, I think, is the ultimate value that leads to the monetary value and the real currency that we see in the world.
Yeah, money is powerful and it transforms our thoughts about what is possible. And most of us are dumbing down our decisions for what is worth doing and how we should spend our time through money. Money has transformed our concept of time and what we should do far more than people imagine, right? Don't waste your time. Are you spending your time wisely? It's everywhere. You can't avoid it. Money is interlinked with time, right? And this happened with the industrial economy. We just underestimate how much it is. And this is why generosity is not sending money to the charity that is approved by your corporation every year. Generosity is a practice. And was my biggest unlock is it's a skill to practice, right? And it becomes easier over time, but it's always uncomfortable because the default culture tells you you should do this in certain ways. I was trying to give money through a charity to underprivileged families where they were donating a bunch of school stuff. I said, can we just give them cash and let them judge? You can't do that. What if they spend it on drugs? Somebody said to me, right? These are just scripts in people's head. Now, if they met that family, they probably wouldn't think that way. But these are just scripts in people's way. There's a right way to give to the proper charities, and it's all this institutional framing of how we channel money. Money goes through proper marketed charities for the proper causes. Right? You can't give $100 to a stranger. I just bumped up my podcast producer's pay preemptively. He's been doing a great job. And I said, he's made my life easier and he's helped me imagine new possibilities. I feel like my podcast is going to take off. I don't know. I'm going to boost his salary and ask if he wants to do some bolder things. So I boost his salary. I increased it. I almost doubled it, like per episode. And he said, oh, wow, this is far more than I would expect. This is going to like make me rich where he lives. And I still felt, I'm a sucker. I shouldn't have gone as high as I did. Right? I still have that, but it's the awareness of working through that and say, okay, just keep going. This is great. This is like a practice. And this is 5 years after those initial experiments. I'm always looking for where can I practice this? I met somebody this past summer. They have a book. They said, I said, oh, do you have any extra copies? They said, oh, you can buy it online. I don't give away my book for free. I think every author should be paid. And I'm like, I don't know. I give my book away like every week. I leave it in the small book things around Austin for fun. I just keep ordering them, putting them around. And I got a message last week. Somebody found mine in Seattle somewhere where I put a book in a small lending library. I gifted, 700 books this past year, and that's probably part of what's helped it unleash itself too. It's like I just don't think that getting paid for things that's not a starting assumption for anything.
Especially when you're trying to go from the world that you were in to the world that you're in now, and that is so hard to explain to people, and that's why I love this conversation. And I kind of want to pivot here as we start getting close to wrapping up into when you're not writing or not talking about your obsession, which is either you yourself and your experiences of going on this path or helping others on their path. What are some of your other hobbies or obsessions or things that you're doing?
So how I think about time, a lot of my non-work experiments really sort of loosened me up. I don't have this anxiety that I need to do things or be productive. If I don't work for a week at a time, it's fine. I have this saying I come back to, there's nothing to be done. It's sort of this Buddhist, like Taoist sort of wisdom. There's nothing to be done. Right. And I have enough trust that there's enough things I like doing and know how to do that I'll probably make money. And I've succeeded even beyond my wildest dreams in the past year as well. But my starting assumption with the day is just to wake up and let my sort of intuition call me. Now, sometimes I have stuff scheduled like this, which I agree to, but Most of my days are open and flexible. But I usually start my day with just writing and see where that takes me. My curiosity takes me in so many directions. I waste enormous amounts of time if the goal was to monetize my time, but it's not. And I found that a lot of my writing happens followed by leisure. Leisure as an active form of contemplation, leisure as me going to the gym in the afternoons and really connecting with my body, and doing things around that. So, I mean, some of my hobbies are shifting now to like acquiring baby equipment and learning about how to be a father.
I can attest to that.
But yeah, I one of my favorite things to do is leisure or wandering, bike rides, long walks, slow experience of time. And I think having a kid will just be another thing I can do with that. And I realized in 2022, somebody said, you got to celebrate yourself. And I struggled with celebration. But I finally realized for me, contemplating, reflecting, taking a slow day here and there is my form of celebration. It's saying, I am alive. All these silly games we're involved in aren't what matter. And just come back to yourself, come back to, like, it's all about love. It's all about doing your best, helping people, like really simple things. And yeah, that's my way to celebrate life. And sometimes I do it with friends. Sometimes I do it by myself.
I love that response. And I want to give you credit for your book. I think it flowed really well. I feel like you intertwined a lot of key quotes and concepts into it that really kept me intrigued. And one of them was the concept was one of the most, because you were talking about time and waste. If you're listening to this, Paul, use the quote fingers of wasted time. Right when you said that, I thought of one of the most valuable ways to spend your time is to believe in people. Quote.
Love that.
And
I think you quoting me?
It's from the book.
I just said I love that to my own quote.
I don't know who wrote that. I think it was from someone.
One of the most worthwhile things in the world is courageously, or I forget what it is. I can pull it out.
Is to believe in people. And when you mentioned, when we were talking about giving and the giving economy, a lot of the topics, like I said, I wanted to give you credit for flowing them together because they all come together in a combination to really convey your message. And when we were talking about giving and something that Thrive has strived to do, and me personally for years and even my whole life, is giving people the belief that they can do something. And that's where, who in your life outside of your wife has been that person for you? Who has been the person that believed in you?
Yeah, so I think this was a hard thing for me after coming on this path because I sort of wished I had more active support from my family. I think a lot of my courage does come from my mother, who has just always she's kind of oppositional to not having a job, though she's better with it now. It's grown on her, but she's always just been there for me. It's this deep trust that she'd support me no matter what. And that is really powerful. And she was such a supportive and nurturing parent, always just removing roadblocks for me, making life easy for me, in the hopes that I would go thrive and make a lot of money in the corporate world. But that is what enabled me to go do my own thing, because it gave me a firm foundation and belief in myself and feeling of safety, right? So definitely her. I think on my creative path, there are some random people that
hoping you were going to say that.
That have just become hyper fans. Not even fans, just they're people I couldn't ever possibly pay back. My friend Jordan has just been hyper enthusiastic. He works in a big company. He doesn't care. He doesn't get offended by what I write. He just wants to root me on all the time. He's replied to, I don't know, 50 emails. My Aunt Debbie, too, which I later found out has gone through a bunch of random paths in her life. From the beginning, she was emailing me after every issue. And another guy, Noel, he's a guy I met. I was interviewing for a job before I decided to quit. And he just, from the beginning, he was my first paid supporter on my Patreon for my newsletter in 2018. I was making, I don't know, $30 a month from that. First one, instant. He always signs up instantly. Sends me emails, supports me. And man, that's all you need. If you have 3 to 5 people in your corner, you're good. And this is one of the biggest reasons to write, share, create, put your dreams out there in the world, because somebody will be willing to root you on. The hard thing is people struggle with is they don't have active fans or supporters in their life. And you don't realize until you put yourself out there that nobody's actively encouraging you. Everyone's sort of stuck or doesn't have enough of their own stuff figured out to think about other people. And that's fine. A lot of people have struggles and I empathize with that, but you need to find the supporters.
I love how you respond to that because especially with your mother, we don't realize that sometimes our biggest supporters don't necessarily believe in our ideas. They believe in us.
Yeah. And that is powerful.
It's
pivotal. I
pivotal.
don't need my mom to want to follow her own self-employed path and become an internet creator. I just need her love. And it took me a long time to realize that I should just share how I feel to her, not tell her my beliefs. I think I see the future's like this and the internet's growing. Doesn't matter. I don't need to convert her. She's already on board to Team Paul, right? And I think too many times we get into these conflicts because we want to convert people to our beliefs. Beliefs are personally useful. Beliefs drive action. I believe I am a healthy person, therefore I will act as a healthy person. You don't need to convert people. This is just an illusion of mass culture again.
We're just following the screen, the news. Yeah, you're 100% right. And I love how you just name dropped some people there. Like some of my friends, like I've literally, shout out to Jeff, I've gotten Venmo notifications.
I've gotten this, a guy, Michael Reed in Boston has done this for me.
Yeah.
Randomly.
Sent me money and was like, go spend it, go do this. Because he's from day one has read my stuff and watched it and shared it. And we both helped each other in a lot of different ways.
It's amazing. Do this for other people. If you're listening and you've never done this for people, find somebody that's doing something brave and you know they're vulnerable. Send them $10 on Venmo and tell them to keep going. You have no idea how that feels. I've been on the receiving end of that, and it blew my, it felt like $1 million, the gratitude. And I gave $100 to that random stranger. This is the crazy thing. I don't know if I put this part in my book. A few months later, one of my friends sent me $100 unprompted. And I asked her, I said, why did you send me that? She just said, it seems like you're onto something interesting. Keep going. It was the same dollar amount. It was so weird. These things flow, and you have enough of these things happen. You start to, I'm not a woo person, but like the world is crazy.
And the crazier part is I have a very similar story. So, you know Ross, man. Yeah. He helped me out one day moving shit from the house. From my storage to the house, and he didn't have to do this. I paid him, but sent him a lump sum in Venmo, and I was just like, I feel like this is a good amount, and then some for his time and efforts. And little did I know that like a day later, my buddies from Ice Barrel were in town, and I ended up helping them out with this event. And it's an event that like I literally showed up because I wanted to do the work for free. Like I love what I do. And then they were like, send us your Venmo information. And when they sent me money, it was like more than what I had given to Ross. And I had no idea that that was even going to happen. And it was just because of out of the blue, we exchanged value, but it's still one of those things where
there's no
in your head, you're just like, oh, like I could have done this or I could have done that. But just like you said earlier, like that's just an innate thing in us. But what we can never, and I like your 4 mindset and the attack mindset of believing in that next day happening. And even if it's 6 months down the line or a year down the line, again, it's something we're not taught. But if you, I think, listen to podcasts like this is where I love education, is training people to see that. Because some people don't even connect that dot. Like it happens for them, but they don't connect the dot and like really let it feel, like they don't feel it. And another thing that I want to convey to people. So Paul challenged you with sending the $10 to someone you believe in, or whatever dollar amount. Something that has changed my life, and I've helped with other people. And I was reminded of this yesterday because it was my birthday and people were sending me video messages. Something so simple is like throughout my day, if I receive a video message from a friend I haven't seen in a while.
You always listen to those.
You always listen, and just seeing their smiling face will change your day. Like it's so much different than a text. So if you have a friend that's like, I have a lot of friends that still live on the East Coast or not near Austin. So every once in a while, I just send video messages and they'll do the same thing back randomly out of the blue. And it like always makes my day.
I'm going to take this one too.
And it makes, honestly, like it makes me feel just as good as that 10, like it's the same thing. And that going back to the concept that it doesn't have to be a monetary thing. Like there's things that we can do with the giving economy that really just every day you could be doing in your life. But I just wanted to say thank you again for showing up here today, spending some time. It was awesome to kind of like pick your brain on some of the concepts that you have in your book. Last thing that I always want to do when have guests on the podcast is I want people to connect with you. That's really why I do this, is to connect like-minded individuals. And 2 things. What is the best thing that somebody could do for you right now? And then how can they, if they really want to get in contact with you and connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. Twitter is probably one of the best, P_Millard, and my newsletter. Follow those, reply. I always reply to people. I love engaging in that conversation. I love it. The best way to support, I guess, would be to buy the book. If you don't want to buy it, I will gift the book to anyone who asks. No reasons needed to give. And I've been doing that since I launched it. So yeah, if you want the book, buy it, or I'll give it to you.
That's an amazing way to go about it. Last question I always ask everybody is, what does the word thriving mean to you? If you were to define thriving, how would you do that?
Yeah, so I'm gonna
go ahead.
Open up the book. You highlighted this.
I know.
Helping people live courageously so that they can thrive is one of the most important things in the world. I want to see people live the lives they are capable of, not just the ones they think they're allowed to live. I think that's what it's all about. And I love that you've honed in on this world too. I'm excited to see Thrive the book one day too.
When we hop off this podcast, one of the main questions I have for you is, if you were to be in my shoes, like what path would you go down to in terms of writing a book? I love writing as well. One of the struggles I've just had is like kind of like putting some structure behind it. You unlocked a lot for me. Like when again, going back to your flow, simply written. I love that. I thrive off simplicity. You can see in this room, like it's just like white and
it's kind of written for an industrial engineer. So.
Yeah, I could tell. I was just like, this is like great. Like he hits on points and then he backs it up and then just constantly flowing like that. So if you have the opportunity, please support Paul. Where should they buy the book at?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter? Okay.
Whatever's easiest for people.
Yeah. Go support him.
Amazon's easy.
Paul Millard. I would love if you would do that. I can't vouch for you and the book enough. It was amazing to get to sit here and talk with you today. And at the end of every podcast, I kind of articulate what my biggest takeaway is. And for me, it was the whole like for versus against. I think especially in today's world where you have social media and such polarization, I don't feel like the against mindset does anything for anybody.
It's boring. It's easy. It's easy to be against something. The only qualification is you're against it. That's it. You have nothing else in common. Being for things, you find people that are aligned with your values.
And you have to do more to be for something. Like,
Yeah.
you have to put effort.
Being against requires no work. I'm against.
You can just object for
I'm
no
against
reason.
the color green. I'm in the club. Anti-greens.
I love it. We're going to end there. Anti-greens. This is CJ Finley with the Thrive on Life podcast. The best thing that you can do for this show is, if you liked Paul's episode, please share it with somebody else. Give it that 5-star rating and review. And I look forward to having you listen to our next episode. Again, this is CJ Finley with the Thrive on Life podcast. Thrive on, y'all.